Okay, here's a tutorial on your MoleMash application. It's a fun game that you're going to be building today. It's going to look kind of like this. We're going to have a mole that is going to be moving around like you see at the carnival fair games where you have to hit the mole. So that mole is moving around and we are going to try to mash it. And it looks like we have this tutorial to help us out here. This says here you'll design a game so that the mole moves once every half of a second. If it is touched, the score increases by 1 and the phone vibrates. So if you don't have the vibration piece on your tablet, we can make some sort of other feedback loop like a noise come through. We can make it even sound like that kitty that came up in our Hello Purr. Here is a picture of a mole. We will need to have that for our image sprite. So if you don't have this, we want to save this image. I'm just going to put it underneath my pictures, really easy to find, and save it as a mole. Okay, so that way we have that for our image sprite. If you want to go into this tutorial here, it has some good details as well. So this particular tutorial will include information on the image sprites, timers and the clock component, procedures, random numbers, text blocks, type blocking. Okay. So the first components, we should be familiar with some of these. A canvas, it's where that's the area that the mole is going to be moved in. A label, which is going to be called score label, shows the score and the number of times, which is the number of times the player has hit the mole, and a button reset. Okay, drag these components onto the palette, onto the viewer, and assign their names. Put my canvas on the top, set its dimensions to 300 by 300. Then it looks like we need to set in a label and then a button. So let's create our project. So my project, start a new project. I'm going to go BSU, MoleMash. Here I am. I need to put a canvas in here. So there it is. And underneath that, let's figure out the size of the canvas one more time on that. Let's see. $300 by 300. So canvas 300 by 300. Okay, there's your window inside there. Then we have a label and a button. Now, I like to do one little feature here when I do my labels. It's not necessary, but a little bit of work on the beginning makes it a little easier at the end. I like to do them inside of an arrangement. Keeping that just automatic is fine. And I drag my, oh boy, so I'm going to have to put the height down a little bit so that I can get to that. Smaller than that. I can get my label inside now that, now this height I can put back to automatic, or maybe make it, like say 50, gosh, more than that. So the reason I do put two labels together in a horizontal arrangement is I do one for a label and one for a counter. So this first one here, what I'm going to rename this one is your score label. And I'm going to have it just read score colon space. Now this second one, this is the one that is going to be manipulated. And all I will the reason I want to break these two apart is that way I won't have to continue to concatenate or add on the title score to a number value. This now are separate, and I can just manipulate the number. Whenever the player hits the mole, it goes up by 1. So I'm going to rename this one to score counter label. And right now I'm going to start it off with a 0 because I have 0 points. Underneath that, we did want to have a reset button that goes down here. And I'm going to rename that to button reset. And I want it to say reset. Okay, so we're using the timer and the clock component to move the mole. So what we will have is a clock, and every time the clock goes off at its interval, we will call a procedure that will then replace the mole somewhere in a random location inside the canvas. So your clock component is driving the movement of your mole. So we need to put in a clock component. We need to put in an image sprite, and inside that image sprite we will put that mole. So a clock component, these are non-visible components, you won't see this. I think a clock might be under sensor. So drag a clock in there, it's going to pop up down here. And then we want to drag in an image sprite. Not a canvas, it's image sprite. That goes in here. Now we're going to make sure we are selected the component, image sprite component, and we're under properties. We're going to put a picture here. We should have already downloaded that mole PNG somewhere, which is right here. Now we have that. We can move this around a little bit too, if we want. Okay, we have our little mole, and we should check to see that these values are correct. Picture is the mole. Make sure that the check it is enabled, that it is active. Has a 500 heading. This is in milliseconds. So that means that this is going to be moving every half of a second. So let's check our clock features here. It's enabled. Right now the interval is set at 1000 milliseconds or every second. We want that mole moving every half a second or every 500 milliseconds. Heading is 0. Interval. Did they give us anything about the interval? 500. Interval 500. Speed is 0. Visibility is on. And you will see that this X and Y moves as I move the image sprite around. But that's where it's just gonna start wherever you have it placed at this point in time. Okay, so we are going to create 2 procedures. Procedures are a set of rules, basically, or a set of commands that you're asking that can be referred to all at once in a single command. So it's a sentence or a sequence of statements. So say, for instance, you wanted to make a procedure to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Well, you'd have to make sure that the procedure, all the steps to making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich are completely identified. All the bugs are worked out. You create all the steps, and then you make a procedure called make peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So every time you want to make a new peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you just simply call on the procedure instead of going through all the steps. Because you have predefined those steps, they're now in a procedure. So we have 2 procedures. We have a mole move and we have an update score. So the mole move moves the sprite to a new random position on the canvas, whereas the update score shows the score by changing the text of the score label, which we have changed to score counter label, at least in my particular example here. Let's start with the mole move and break down this procedure. So we'll create a procedure called mole move, And we will set the mole's X to some random position from the width of the canvas minus the width of the mole. Now, the reason we do this is that that way that the mole won't pop up off of your screen somewhere when we are having it pick a random position. So we're going to pick it somewhere between the width of the screen, which is all of this, minus the width of the mole. So this would be essentially the farthest over to the right that mole could randomly appear, so that we make sure that it stays entirely on the canvas and visible to the user. Same thing is going to go for our Y position. We're going to take the height of our canvas minus the height of our mole sprite, so that down here, this essentially will be the farthest that Y could go. Y could probably only go around 253, whereas in this particular case, X could only go up to 259. But as we know that this is a 300 by 300 screen, that way when the mole is randomly selected, that the mole move procedure is called, placing that mole image sprite in a random location on your canvas, it will be visible to the user. So that's the code for this. We're going to code that up right now. We're going to create a procedure in your blocks editor. And we're going to call it mole move. And what we're going to do is we're going to take your image sprite, which is the mole. We're going to set its X and Y to some random position. Let's see, okay, set image X to some random position. So we're going to go to math, and let's look around to some, and it said it wanted it to be a random fraction. So we're going to say, we're going to grab the multiplication block here, and we're going to add in a subtraction block in the second part over here. So we have now, we're going to create a random fraction somewhere, and we're going to multiply it by the canvas width minus the height, the width of the mole. I'm just going to do this in. Okay, let's take a look at that. So set the image sprite X to a random fraction between canvas width and your image sprite width. Now, I'm not necessarily liking this just saying image sprite, so I'm going to go back in here real quick. I'm going to rename this to image sprite. I thought we could rename that to something. Anyways, well, maybe I'm not able to rename that. Right here, sorry, rename image sprite to mole. Okay, that makes it easier for me. So I'm just going to rename it to mole. So now when I go into my blocks editor, it says our mole X. And this is going to place it somewhere on the X-axis in a random location. We're taking into consideration that we need to take away the mole's width from the canvas's width. And I'm going to just do a real easy duplication to set my Y. Instead of canvas width, we're doing height. Instead of mole width, we're doing mole height. Okay, we have that going pretty good. We're going to do now our update score procedure. So we're going to create a new procedure. And this one is going to be called update score. And for this one, we're going to adjust the score counter label's text. So we have this, not the label itself, the counter. So we want to set its text to get global score. So we're going to have a new variable we will need to have here, and we're going to call it global. Just call it score. And this will be, starting off, we're going to initialize that to just 0. So we have a value that it begins at. Now we're going to set our score counter label to whatever our global score is. So we're going to get that from right there, get global score. So we set it to 0, and we're going to update that. Now this is the reasoning why I didn't have 2 different labels. You're going to have to concatenate a string with some sort of like integer, and it makes it's possible to do that, but the way that I have organized mine, I have less steps here to get the same thing done. I did a little front loading, and it's easier for me now. Okay, so now then we're going to use a timer to drive our mole. So every time the timer goes off, we call the procedure mole move. It goes in and finds this mole move procedure, and it takes that mole image sprite and places it in a random place on the canvas. So the timer is going to drive our mole move. So go here to our clock. When it goes off, we're going to call the procedure mole move. So every time this goes off, it causes our mole to move. Now we need to figure out what we're going to do when the mole is touched. So we have this method here, when the mole dot touched. We're set global score to whatever it was plus 1. And we're going to call some sort of a noise to vibrate, but we might do a sound here because I have a sound piece, but I don't have a vibration piece on my emulator. Then we're going to call the procedure to update score, and we're going to have it move again. So the update score, let's take a look at that real quick. It's just simply changing the label. So let's do a event handler for when that mole is touched. So when that mole is touched, we want to set our global score to what it was plus 1. So we need to go back into our counter label and get the previous score, which was its text, plus 1. Okay, now what I'm going to be doing is, instead of having that vibration piece, I'm going to put in a sound component real quick. Sound as a non-visible component down here. You can see it right there at the bottom. And I'm going to give it that meow that we had before, just as a this way, I have some sort of a feedback because my emulator will not buzz. So if you have the vibration feature to that, continue with the example here that says noise.vibrate. We're just going to have the call sound play. Okay, so moving right in back into our blocks editor, we are going to, so when our mole is touched, we are going to change the score. And I'm going to call, just to play my sound. So, oh, I'm on the clock. Sorry, I need to be in my sound. Sorry, that's why I was confused with it. Call sound play. And now we need to just call our 2 procedures here so that we update our score, and then we call the procedure to move it again. So we're going to update our score, and then we're going to tell the mole to move 1 more time. Let's go back into our specs here. Okay, resetting the score. We will need to do a reset button as well so that we just are able to begin a new game. So that reset is going to simply set the global score back to 0 and then call our update score again. So let's go back in here. We have our button reset. When we click that button reset, we're going to set our set our global score back to 0. And we need to have our update score be called to show that on the label. There's some features here. If I right click on this, I can clean up my blocks, make them look a little bit easier on the eye there, organized to some degree. Okay, so let's give it a go. I'm going to set up my emulator and run it. Okay, so here's my emulator. It's up and running. I did adjust the timer interval to 1000 because the mole was moving so fast that I was having a hard time with this little mouse catching up with it. So your mole will move faster than this, and it may vibrate, but I do have mine set to play a sound. And let's see if my reset button works. Okay, so I have a score label here that is only impacted if I hit my mole. And when I get it, it is, come on. It's doing an error here. It's going up by 6, so we need to debug that. I'm calling two things happening at once here, and we need to manipulate that a little bit. See what I'm happening is okay, well, we're going to work on that here in just a second. I'm trying to debug that. I'm pretty sure I found my error. It was in this mole touch method right here. I was updating, I was using the wrong starting values. So what I need to do is just take global score and add 1 to it. So I need to get its previous global score and then add 1 to it, reassign that value to global score, and then call my update score. Hopefully we have debugged that pretty well. Let's reset our emulator. Now we have a set of 0. This. Oh, I got it. It's still, gosh dang it. Come on. It is jumping too high. So I need to debug some more. Okay, well, I'm not sure exactly what I did. Nothing, absolutely. I think it just took a second for this emulator to catch up. So I have slowed the mole down a little bit more. We have another test going on. So when I click it one time, it makes the sound and updates my score label by 1. So we are doing the right thing here. Sorry for that delay. Now what we need to do is to check our specs and see where we're at. Okay, we have completed the program.